The airport was a hub of restless energy, filled with the usual symphony of rolling suitcases, clicking heels, and boarding announcements echoing overhead. Vanessa Sinclair walked with an air of quiet confidence through the sleek terminal, her eyes scanning the departure board before heading toward the first-class lounge. She was a woman who had built her success, not through inheritance but through relentless determination. Dressed in a fitted, stylish but modest black pantsuit, her curly hair pulled back into a low bun, Vanessa blended effortlessly into the crowd. She had no interest in flaunting her wealth or status, but she was there for a reason, to experience firsthand the level of service at her own airline, Sinclair Airways, without anyone knowing who she was. It was a routine check, something she did occasionally to ensure fairness and professionalism across all levels. She had spent years witnessing the biases that played out in public spaces, especially against people who looked like her. This was why she was so passionate about her company's commitment to inclusivity. But today she was about to come face to face with the very discrimination she had worked so hard to eliminate. At the first-class boarding gate, passengers were lining up, a mix of business professionals, socialites, and elite travelers. Among them stood Karen Whitmore, a woman who embodied privilege in its purest form. With platinum blonde hair styled to perfection, a designer scarf draped effortlessly over her shoulder, and a smug air about her, Karen radiated entitlement. Karen had spent her life assuming she belonged in the best spaces, that she was the standard against which others should be measured. And in her mind, Vanessa wasn't it. The moment Karen's eyes landed on Vanessa, a flicker of irritation crossed her face. The lines had been moving smoothly, yet now she found herself sharing the first-class line with a black woman who, by Karen's unspoken rules, didn't belong there. Her sharp gaze flickered to Vanessa's clothes, her simple luggage, no designer logos, no extravagant accessories. Nothing about Vanessa screamed wealth in Karen's eyes, and that, to her, was unacceptable. Karen stepped forward abruptly, gripping the handle of her expensive carry-on with unnecessary force before turning to the gate agent, her voice dripping with forced politeness. "Excuse me," she said, motioning toward Vanessa. "I think there's been a mistake. First-class passengers are boarding here." The agent, a young woman in a crisp airline uniform, glanced at Vanessa before checking her ticket. "Yes, ma'am. This is the first-class line." Karen let out a tight, humorless laugh. "Right, but she is standing here." She emphasized the word like it was a piece of trash littering her personal space. Vanessa didn't react at first. She had encountered people like Karen before, people who thought they had the right to dictate where she could or couldn't be. Instead, she simply held up her boarding pass, the words, "First Class," printed in bold. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Vanessa said calmly, her voice steady. Karen's lips curled into a smirk, but her eyes gleamed with something nastier. "Are you sure? Because I don't recall seeing people like you in first class very often." A hush spread through the small crowd. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, while others pretended not to hear. "People like me," Vanessa repeated, arching an eyebrow. "You mean paying customers?" Karen folded her arms. "I mean employees who get free upgrades they don't deserve. I know how this works. You work here, don't you?" Before Vanessa could answer, Karen turned back to the gate agent, speaking as if Vanessa had ceased to exist. "This is ridiculous. I demand to speak to a manager. This woman is obviously sneaking into first class. This is exactly why security needs to be stricter. She's probably someone's assistant trying to get a free ride." Vanessa exhaled slowly, keeping her composure intact. She had expected bias, but this level of blatant disrespect was appalling. Still, she refused to be rattled. The gate agent, clearly uncomfortable, checked Vanessa's ticket again, then turned back to Karen with a professional but firm tone. "Ma'am, her boarding pass is valid. She is a first-class passenger, just like you." Karen's expression twisted in disbelief. I don't buy it. At this point, a few nearby passengers had started to take out their phones, subtly recording the scene. A businessman in a tailored navy suit shifted his weight, shooting Karen a disapproving glance. One woman, an elderly lady in pearls, cleared her throat and spoke. If she has a ticket, what's the issue? Karen ignored her. Instead, she took a step closer to Vanessa, lowering her voice but keeping the venom sharp. You should just admit it. You don't belong here. It'll be less embarrassing for you that way. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, studying Karen with an unreadable expression. Then she smiled, a small, knowing smile that made Karen's face twitch with annoyance. I think I'll let you embarrass yourself, Vanessa said smoothly. Karen's jaw tightened. She was losing control of the situation, and she hated it. A male gate agent, having overheard the exchange, stepped forward. Ma'am, if you continue to harass other passengers, we will have to ask you to step aside. Karen let out a dramatic gasp. I'm being harassed? She clutched her expensive purse like Vanessa had physically threatened her. I feel unsafe. I don't know what she's planning, but I refuse to get on a plane with someone who is obviously sneaking into first class. Vanessa let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. You really think if I didn't belong here, security wouldn't have stopped me by now? Karen refused to listen. I want her searched. I want her removed. The gate agents exchanged looks, unsure of how to proceed. One of them radioed for security, much to Karen's satisfaction. Vanessa sighed, then did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket and took out her phone. Her fingers moved quickly, typing a message before pressing send. Karen smirked. What, calling your manager? Maybe they can get you a seat back in coach where you belong. Vanessa locked eyes with her, unbothered. No, she said, just letting the right people know what's happening. Karen scoffed, completely unaware that Vanessa had just sent a direct message to the executive team of the airline she owned. Seconds later, a voice crackled over the intercom. Attention, gate personnel. Do not allow boarding changes at gate 12 until further notice. Karen blinked. What? No, this is about her, not me. Vanessa only smiled, watching the realization dawn on Karen's face. This was only the beginning. Vanessa remained perfectly still, watching as Karen's smug satisfaction flickered for a moment. It was clear she was still confident she had the upper hand, but something about Vanessa's composure unsettled her. Karen wasn't used to people like Vanessa, people who didn't shrink under the weight of her privilege, who didn't beg or plead when she wielded her entitlement like a weapon. The tension in the boarding area grew thick. The gate agents whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Karen, Vanessa, and the security officers now approaching. Passengers murmured, shifting in place as they recorded the scene. A few had already started quietly backing away, recognizing that things were about to escalate. Karen, sensing that she had an audience, squared her shoulders and turned toward the approaching security team with the air of someone who fully expected to be vindicated. Finally, she huffed, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. I need this woman removed. I don't know what kind of scam she's trying to pull, but she doesn't belong here, and frankly, I don't feel safe sharing a plane with her. One of the security officers, a tall, serious-looking man with short graying hair, barely reacted. Ma'am, what seems to be the issue? Karen's eyes lit up at the question, her tone shifting into exaggerated concern. This woman, she said, jabbing a manicured finger toward Vanessa, is trying to board first class under false pretenses. I don't know how she got past check-in, but I can guarantee she does not belong here. She's probably using a stolen ticket or something. Vanessa let out a soft, almost amused breath, but she still didn't react the way Karen expected. No outrage, no frantic protests, just patience, as if she was waiting for Karen to fully bury herself before stepping in. The security officer, however, didn't take Karen at her word. Instead, he looked at Vanessa, his expression neutral. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Without a word, Vanessa extended her first-class ticket. The officer took it, scanned it with trained efficiency, then checked the corresponding passenger list on his tablet. A moment of silence passed before he handed the ticket back with a curt nod. "Everything is in order. Miss Sinclair is a verified first-class passenger." Karen's expression froze. "No," she blurted out. "That can't be right." The officer gave her a look, unimpressed. "It's correct, ma'am." Karen's face turned red. Then how did she get a ticket? Someone must have made a mistake, maybe an employee. "She purchased it," the officer interrupted, his tone growing sharper. "Like any other passenger." Karen's lips parted, but for a moment she didn't seem to know what to say. Then, just as quickly, she pivoted. "Fine. Maybe she has a ticket. Maybe. But I still don't feel comfortable sitting near her. She's making me uncomfortable." Vanessa exhaled slowly, watching Karen scramble to hold on to any shred of power she had left. "What exactly about me makes you uncomfortable?" she finally asked. Karen's mouth snapped shut. She hesitated just a beat too long, as if her brain was scrambling to phrase her answer in a way that didn't expose her. She settled on, "Your attitude is aggressive." A low murmur rippled through the passengers nearby. Some shook their heads, others exchanged knowing glances. The phrase aggressive had been thrown around too often, too conveniently, at black women who simply existed in spaces where people like Karen didn't think they belonged. Vanessa let out a short, humorless laugh. "Aggressive? I haven't raised my voice once. Meanwhile, you've been standing here yelling, demanding to speak to managers, and trying to have me forcibly removed. But I'm the one being aggressive." Karen's face burned. "You—" Vanessa took a slow step forward, lowering her voice just enough that only Karen could hear. "Let me guess," she murmured. "You thought I was just some nobody who snuck into first class, didn't you? You thought you could make a scene, get me thrown out and move on with your flight like nothing happened." Karen swallowed hard. "But now," Vanessa continued, tilting her head slightly, "you're realizing you might have picked the wrong one." Karen's throat bobbed as she struggled to regain her footing. Then, as if grasping at the last straw, she turned back to the security officer. "I don't feel safe. She's threatening me," she insisted, voice trembling for dramatic effect. "I think she needs to be searched. She could be carrying something dangerous." The accusation hung in the air like poison. A sharp inhale rippled through the surrounding crowd. The security officer's neutral expression hardened. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "are you accusing Miss Sinclair of being a security threat without evidence?" Karen blinked rapidly, realizing that she might have overstepped. I didn't say that. I just think—" But it was too late. The officer straightened. "Because making false accusations of that nature is a serious offense, one that comes with consequences." Karen's breathing hitched. "I was just concerned for the safety of the flight." "That's enough," another voice cut in. It was the airline executive, the man who had been watching the exchange from a few steps away. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded an air of authority that made everyone straighten. Karen visibly relaxed, assuming he was stepping in to back her up. She was wrong. The executive turned his attention to Vanessa, his expression shifting into one of deep regret. "Miss Sinclair, I deeply apologize for the treatment you've received. This is not the standard of our airline, and I assure you it will be addressed." Karen blinked, her face twisting in confusion. Apologizing? To her? Then, before Karen could process it, the executive turned toward her. And when he spoke again, his voice was ice-cold. "As for you, Miss Whitmore," he said sharply, "we will not tolerate this kind of behavior toward any passenger, let alone one of our most valued customers." Karen's stomach dropped. "Wait, what?" she stammered. I was just trying to make sure everything was fair. The executive ignored her. His focus was on the security officer. Escort Miss Whitmore out of this boarding area immediately. She will not be flying with us today. Karen gasped. What? You can't do that. I paid for my ticket. And you will receive a refund, the executive said smoothly. But you will not be permitted to board this flight. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment, and you have blatantly violated it. Karen's world spun. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. She was supposed to win. Instead, she was being humiliated in front of everyone. Two security officers stepped in, firm but professional. "Ma'am, please gather your things," Karen panicked. "No, wait, you don't understand. She's not who you think she is." "Oh, I know exactly who she is," the executive said, "and that's why this conversation is over." Karen's entire body shook as the security officers gently but firmly guided her away. She struggled, tried to resist, but it was over. And as Vanessa calmly stepped forward to board the plane, she finally spoke one last time. "I hope you enjoyed the show," she said smoothly, "because it's about to get a lot worse for you." Vanessa walked through the jet bridge with an air of quiet confidence. The tension from the boarding gate still lingered in the air, but she had long learned how to carry herself with grace, despite moments like this. This wasn't her first experience dealing with people like Karen Whitmore. The flight attendant at the entrance of the plane greeted her with a warm but slightly nervous smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Sinclair," she said, her voice a touch more respectful now. Vanessa gave her a polite nod before stepping inside. First class was already bustling with passengers settling in, adjusting their bags, and getting comfortable. She moved down the aisle with ease, her seat number already in mind. But as she reached her row, she paused. Seated beside her, clutching the armrest with barely contained frustration, was none other than Karen Whitmore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them crackled with unresolved tension. Karen's face was flushed, her jaw clenched so tightly that it looked like she might break a tooth. Vanessa, on the other hand, simply raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. A sharp inhale, a forced, bitter smile. "No," Karen muttered under her breath. "Absolutely not." Vanessa slid into her seat, her movements calm and deliberate. "Something wrong?" she asked, feigning innocence. Karen let out a harsh laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "You—" She lowered her voice, though the anger in it remained. "You're still here." Vanessa glanced around theatrically. "Seems like it." Karen's fingers tightened around the leather strap of her purse. "This is a joke. This has to be a joke." Vanessa simply smiled. "I assure you it's not." Karen let out a short, sharp breath through her nose. She glanced toward the flight attendant standing at the front of the cabin and waved her over aggressively. The young woman approached cautiously. "Yes, ma'am," Karen pointed at Vanessa as if she were a misplaced piece of luggage. "I need a different seat. Now." The flight attendant's smile stiffened. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're fully booked in first class. There are no available seats." Karen's face darkened. "Check again." The flight attendant hesitated before glancing at Vanessa, who remained composed, waiting. Then she turned back to Karen, her voice carefully measured. "I just confirmed with the crew. There are no additional seats available. I'm afraid you'll need to remain in your assigned seat." Karen exhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the armrest like it was the only thing keeping her from completely losing control. "This is ridiculous," she hissed under her breath. Vanessa turned to her, her voice as smooth as ever. "It's a long flight, Karen. You might want to get comfortable." Karen snapped her head toward Vanessa, her eyes burning with resentment. "Don't talk to me," Vanessa smirked. "I wasn't planning on it." The engines outside roared to life, signaling the impending takeoff. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight crew began their final preparations. Karen continued to fume beside Vanessa, her chest rising and falling with barely contained fury. Then, as the flight attendant walked away, Karen leaned in, lowering her voice to a whisper. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," she muttered, "but this isn't over." Vanessa, unbothered, reached for her seatbelt. "I never said it was." The announcement came over the intercom, signaling for all passengers to fasten their seatbelts. The plane began to taxi down the runway, the slight vibration of the engines pulsing beneath them. Karen sat stiffly, her jaw clenched so tight Vanessa could practically hear her grinding her teeth. She exuded an unmistakable energy of someone who was not used to losing, someone who had spent their entire life getting their way. And yet, for the first time, she had encountered a battle she couldn't win. The irony was almost poetic. As the plane lifted into the air, Vanessa leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. She had flown countless times before, but something about this particular flight felt different. She could feel the weight of what had happened, the stares from the other passengers who had witnessed the altercation back at the gate. Karen, still rigid in her seat, glanced toward Vanessa one last time before she turned away, crossing her arms in bitter silence. But Vanessa knew Karen wasn't done. Not yet. And that was fine. Because Vanessa wasn't done either. The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin as the flight settled into its cruising altitude. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling to passengers that it was time to relax. But the tension between Vanessa and Karen was far from settled. Karen sat stiffly beside Vanessa, her arms crossed so tightly across her chest, it was as if she were physically trying to hold herself together. Every now and then she would shoot daggers at Vanessa from the corner of her eye, but Vanessa remained unbothered, casually flipping through the in-flight magazine as if she didn't have a care in the world. The first-class flight attendants made their rounds, offering drinks and light refreshments. When they reached Karen, she immediately leaned forward, speaking in a low but sharp W. The young flight attendant, a blonde woman named Jessica, blinked in confusion. "Ma'am, is there something wrong?" Karen glanced at Vanessa as if she were a disease before returning her eyes to the attendant. "Yes, actually, there is. I don't feel safe." Jessica's polite smile faltered. "I'm sorry, ma'am. What do you mean?" Karen let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head as if she were explaining something painfully obvious. "I mean that woman," she said, jabbing a finger toward Vanessa. "I don't know how she got on this flight, but I want her removed." Jessica's eyes widened slightly before she quickly composed herself. "Ma'am, Miss Sinclair is a verified first-class passenger. She has every right to be here." Karen let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Oh, I highly doubt that." Jessica cleared her throat, suddenly uncomfortable. "Do you believe she has done something inappropriate or dangerous?" Karen's face twisted into an expression of pure entitlement. "Look at her," she hissed. "People like her are always up to something, always causing problems. I just want to make sure we don't have a situation on our hands." At that moment, Vanessa closed the magazine she had been reading and turned to face Karen fully. "A situation," Vanessa repeated, her voice smooth and composed. Karen's lips curled in disdain. "Yes, a situation." Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "Let me get this straight. You, a random woman on this flight who knows nothing about me, just decided that I, someone minding my business, sitting in my assigned seat, am suddenly a problem." Karen lifted her chin. "I trust my instincts." Vanessa smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "Your instincts, huh?" She turned toward the flight attendant. "Jessica, was it?" Jessica nodded hesitantly. Vanessa's voice remained calm, but the authority in her tone was unmistakable. "Jessica, tell me, have I done anything to warrant this accusation?" Jessica's cheeks flushed slightly. "No, ma'am." Vanessa nodded. "Have I broken any rules? Caused any disruptions?" Jessica glanced between the two women before shaking her head. "No, ma'am," Karen scoffed. Oh, for God's sake, it's not about what you've done, it's about what you could do. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been detonated. Jessica's expression shifted from discomfort to something much closer to disgust. A few of the other passengers, who had been trying to ignore the tension, now openly stared at Karen. Even the flight attendant serving drinks a few rows ahead paused mid-pour, her eyes flickering toward the scene unfolding. Vanessa took a slow breath, carefully placing her hands on the armrest. You have a very dangerous way of thinking, Karen. Karen bristled. Excuse me? Vanessa's gaze didn't waver. People like me, always causing problems? You don't know me. You don't know who I am, what I do, or why I'm on this flight. And yet, you've already decided I don't belong. Karen's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, a voice cut in. Is there a problem here? Both women turned to see the head flight attendant, a tall, dark-haired woman named Monica, standing with her arms crossed. She had the demeanor of someone who had been in the airline business for years and had seen it all. Karen immediately switched tactics, turning on the waterworks. Oh, thank goodness. I was just telling Jessica here that I don't feel safe sitting next to her. She gestured wildly toward Vanessa. She's aggressive. She grabbed me earlier. Vanessa's eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh, I did? Karen's lower lip trembled. Yes, and I just don't feel comfortable. I need to be moved. Monica's face remained neutral, but there was something in her expression that suggested she wasn't buying a single word of it. She turned to Vanessa. Ma'am, have you put your hands on this passenger in any way? Vanessa leaned back slightly, her voice steady. No, I have not. Monica nodded. And Jessica, did you see anything? Jessica hesitated before shaking her head. No, ma'am. I've been right here, and I haven't seen anything happen between them. Karen let out a loud, frustrated huff. Of course you didn't see anything. She's sneaky. I know she did it. Monica's eyes darkened slightly. Ma'am, I need to remind you that making false accusations against another passenger is a serious offense. Karen's mouth opened in disbelief. False? You think I'm lying? Monica gave her a long, measured look. Yes. A few gasps rippled through the cabin. Even Vanessa had to fight back a smirk. Karen turned bright red. This is ridiculous. I'm calling security when we land. Monica didn't flinch. You are welcome to file a complaint, ma'am, but I strongly suggest you consider the consequences of making false statements. Karen's nostrils flared. I want to speak to the captain. Monica tilted her head slightly. Are you reporting a real emergency? Karen hesitated. Well, because if you're not, Monica continued, then I suggest you let this matter go and enjoy the rest of your flight. Karen stared at her, furious and humiliated. But before she could argue, Monica leaned in just slightly and lowered her voice so that only Karen could hear. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Karen froze. Vanessa, catching the shift in Karen's face, gave Monica a curious glance, but Monica simply straightened, brushing her hands down the front of her uniform. Now, she said, her voice bright again, would either of you like something to drink? Karen didn't respond. Vanessa smirked. I'll take a glass of champagne. Jessica let out a small, nervous laugh, while Monica smiled. Coming right up. As she walked away, the passengers around them slowly turned back to their own conversations, though some still stole glances at Karen. Karen, defeated and absolutely livid, sank back into her seat, fuming. But Vanessa? She knew that something had just shifted. Karen wasn't just mad anymore. She was desperate. And desperate people? They did reckless things. The tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Passengers who had initially ignored Karen's antics were now keenly aware that something wasn't right. The energy had shifted, and Karen wasn't done yet. Vanessa could feel it. She knew people like Karen, the type who thrived on control, who couldn't stand being challenged, and who would do anything, to regain the upper hand. And sure enough, as the flight continued, Karen sat upright, her expression cold and calculating. She was planning something. Vanessa knew better than to underestimate desperate people. But what Vanessa didn't expect was for Karen to escalate so quickly. The moment the flight attendants stepped away to prepare drinks, Karen suddenly lurched forward, pressing the call button above her seat repeatedly until it chimed loudly throughout the cabin. Passengers looked over, some rolling their eyes, others sighing in exasperation. Monica, the head flight attendant, returned within seconds, her expression already tight with frustration. "Ma'am, how can I assist you?" Karen turned in her seat, her voice deliberately loud enough for others to hear. "I need this woman removed." A hush fell over the surrounding rows. Monica took a slow, steady breath. "Ma'am, we've already addressed this. Miss Sinclair is a first-class passenger, just like you." Karen's expression darkened, but she wasn't backing down. "She put her hands on me." A few murmurs rippled through the cabin. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging uneasy glances. The tension thickened. Vanessa inhaled slowly, keeping her face composed. Monica's patience was wearing thin. "I'm going to need you to clarify that statement. Are you formally accusing Miss Sinclair of physical assault?" Karen squared her shoulders. "Yes." A collective gasp echoed through the cabin. Vanessa stiffened, but she didn't react. She just stared at Karen, her jaw tightening slightly. Karen had just crossed the line. Monica wasn't buying it. Her hands were clasped in front of her, her body rigid with disbelief. "Let me be absolutely clear," she said, her voice steady but firm. "If you are falsely accusing another passenger of a crime, that is a federal offense." Karen's jaw clenched, but she didn't back down. Monica turned slightly, making a subtle motion toward another flight attendant. Jessica, the young blonde attendant from earlier, quickly left the cabin. Karen smirked. "Good. Maybe now something will be done about this." Vanessa, still calm, finally spoke. "You sure about this, Karen?" Karen flinched slightly at the sound of her own name coming from Vanessa's lips, but she quickly covered it up with a sneer. "Oh, absolutely." Vanessa exhaled, tilting her head slightly. "And you're positive I laid hands on you?" Karen scoffed. "You know you did." Vanessa's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it now. "I really hope you thought this through." Karen blinked, momentarily thrown off. What's that supposed to mean? But before Vanessa could answer, Jessica returned, this time with 2 uniformed security officers. The already tense cabin fell into absolute silence. Karen's smirk grew wider, mistaking their presence as confirmation that she was finally getting her way. "There," she said triumphantly, motioning toward Vanessa. "That's the one. I want her arrested." One of the officers, a broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense demeanor, narrowed his eyes. "You're the one who reported an assault?" Karen lifted her chin. "Yes, I am." The officer turned his sharp gaze toward Vanessa. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say about this accusation?" Vanessa met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, I'd like to see the footage." Karen's face drained of color. The entire plane seemed to hold its breath. The security officer arched an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Vanessa remained composed. "This is a commercial airline. There are cameras everywhere, including in this cabin." A murmur rippled through the passengers. Karen's eyes darted nervously around. Vanessa continued, "Since this woman is so sure that I put my hands on her, let's go ahead and pull the footage." She turned toward the security officers. "That way we can all see exactly what happened." Karen visibly swallowed. The officer turned to Monica. "Is that correct? Are there cameras on board?" Monica, arms crossed, nodded. Yes. Every first-class cabin has surveillance. I can pull the footage right now. Karen's breath hitched. The officer, now much less patient, turned back to Karen. Ma'am, before we move forward with any legal action, I need to confirm. Are you standing by your accusation? Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. She was trapped. If she doubled down, the footage would prove she was lying. If she backed out now, she'd look like a fool in front of the entire plane. Vanessa watched it all unfold with quiet amusement. Karen was sweating now. I might have been mistaken. Another loud gasp from the passengers. The security officer's expression hardened. Mistaken? Karen licked her lips nervously. It's possible I misunderstood what happened. Monica scoffed. That's convenient. The officer did not look amused. So, to be clear, you are retracting your accusation. Karen's hands clutched her purse so tightly, her knuckles turned white. I guess so. Jessica, who had been standing silently nearby, exhaled sharply. The entire cabin was now watching Karen with pure disgust. The security officer crossed his arms. Ma'am, falsely reporting a crime is a serious offense. Karen, now fully panicked, stammered out a weak excuse. It was just a misunderstanding. I overreacted. The officer wasn't buying it. Overreacted? He turned toward Vanessa. Ma'am, do you wish to press charges for defamation? Karen's head snapped toward Vanessa, eyes wide with terror. Vanessa leaned back in her seat, tilting her head as if considering it. She could. She had every right to. And Karen knew it. Vanessa let the silence stretch, letting Karen sweat before she finally spoke. No, she said simply. Karen visibly sagged in relief. But then Vanessa leaned in just slightly, her voice low and firm. But I promise you this will not be forgotten. Karen's breath hitched. The security officer sighed heavily before motioning toward Karen. Ma'am, you need to remain in your seat for the rest of this flight. If you cause any more disruptions, you will be removed and permanently banned from this airline. Do you understand? Karen nodded frantically, suddenly desperate to disappear. The officer gave one last long look before finally walking away. Passengers who had been watching in shock now turned their eyes toward Vanessa with newfound respect. Vanessa let out a slow, steady breath, then reached for her champagne. The lesson was far from over. But Karen, she had just realized she had no idea who she was dealing with. Karen sat in her seat, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting from side to side as she tried to process what had just happened. She had come onto this flight thinking she had control, that she could dictate who belonged and who didn't, and now the very people she had expected to rally behind her were watching her with pure contempt. Her fingers dug into the armrest, her face hot with embarrassment. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Vanessa, on the other hand, exhaled slowly, then took a sip of her champagne. She hadn't needed to raise her voice, hadn't needed to argue. Karen had destroyed herself. And Vanessa? She had simply let her. But Karen wasn't done yet. She couldn't be. She refused to let this woman win. As the flight attendants moved around the cabin, resuming service as if nothing had happened, Karen's mind raced. There had to be one more thing she could do. Then, an idea. Karen turned sharply toward a flight attendant passing by. She plastered on her best concerned citizen face, her voice suddenly sickly sweet. "Excuse me," she said, "but I think you should know. That woman is acting suspiciously." The flight attendant, Monica, the one who had already had enough of Karen's antics, narrowed her eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you clarify what you mean?" Karen leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to appear serious, but making sure the passengers around her could still hear. "I don't know exactly," she whispered, shaking her head in faux concern, But I saw her using her phone earlier in a very strange way. She kept typing things, looking around like she was hiding something. I don't want to alarm anyone, but with everything going on in the world today, I just think you should check." There it was. The moment the words left her mouth, a few passengers around them stiffened. Karen saw it. That little seed of doubt she had planted. It didn't have to be true. It just had to be believable enough to make people uncomfortable. Monica's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, unless you have a specific concern, I'm going to have to ask you to refrain from making baseless accusations." Karen's eyes widened in mock innocence. "Baseless? I'm just trying to keep everyone safe. Surely it wouldn't hurt to just check her phone." Vanessa, who had been pretending not to listen, slowly set her champagne glass down and turned her head slightly. Karen saw that movement, and her confidence spiked again. Because she knew. This was personal now. Vanessa turned fully, her expression unreadable. "You want them to check my phone?" Karen's lips curved into a deliberate, self-satisfied smile. "If you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem, right?" Passengers whispered. Murmurs spread through the cabin. Vanessa stared at Karen, her face still composed, but something about her had shifted. Then, to everyone's surprise, Vanessa slowly pulled out her phone and held it up. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steady and clear. Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" Vanessa shrugged slightly, tilting her phone so everyone could see the unlocked screen. "Since you seem so desperate to get into my business, let's get this over with." Karen wasn't expecting that. She hesitated. "Well, I don't need to actually see it myself." Vanessa's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "Oh, but you do." Karen's stomach twisted. Vanessa turned to Monica, who had been standing with arms crossed, watching the exchange. "Would you like to check my messages, Monica? Since this passenger is so concerned." Monica, seeing exactly what Vanessa was doing, smirked. "I trust you, Miss Sinclair. No need for that." Vanessa's eyes flicked back to Karen, trapping her in a silent challenge. Karen's mouth opened and closed, her breath quickening. I just think—" But Vanessa didn't let her finish. "No, you don't." Karen froze. Vanessa's voice was calm but edged with steel. "You don't think. You assume. You fabricate. You manipulate." Passengers murmured in agreement, nodding along. Karen's smugness cracked. Vanessa leaned in slightly, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. "You tried to get me removed from this plane with a false assault accusation. That didn't work. Now you're trying to paint me as a security threat." She tilted her head, letting the words sink in. "And when that fails, what's next?" Karen's face was flushed red, but she refused to back down. "You're making this into something it's not." Vanessa cut her off. "No, you did that." Karen glared, her hands clenching into fists on her lap. Vanessa exhaled, then gave a chillingly casual smile. "Tell me, Karen, how do you think this is going to end?" Karen didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. Vanessa leaned back, picking up her champagne once more, her tone mockingly casual. Let's recap. You publicly humiliated yourself, lied about being assaulted, got caught, and now you're grasping at straws." She took a slow sip. "Do you have a backup plan? Because this isn't working out for you." Karen was seething, but she had no way out. The security officers, who had been monitoring the exchange, finally stepped forward again. The lead officer cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore." Karen's stomach dropped. "This is the second time you've made false accusations against another passenger." Karen shook her head frantically. I was just concerned about—" The officer raised a hand, cutting her off. "I'm going to be very clear. If there is one more complaint about you on this flight, you will be removed immediately and permanently banned from this airline." Passengers burst into murmurs of approval, some even clapping softly. Karen looked around, but no one was on her side anymore. She had lost. Completely. And Vanessa? She sat back in her seat, watching the downfall unfold exactly as she knew it would, because Karen had played a very dangerous game. And now? She was one breath away from losing everything. Karen sat stiffly in her seat, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she clenched her fists in her lap. She had lost control. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one calling the shots. She wasn't the victim. She wasn't the woman everyone rushed to defend. No, she was the problem. Her face burned as she glanced around. The passengers who had once ignored her were now staring, some whispering, others shaking their heads. Even the flight attendants, the very people she usually had wrapped around her finger, were watching her with suspicion instead of sympathy. Karen swallowed hard, gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. This can't be happening. Vanessa, on the other hand, was calm, effortlessly composed. She leaned back in her seat, one leg crossed over the other, sipping her champagne as if she hadn't just single-handedly dismantled Karen's illusion of power. She didn't even have to try. That was the worst part. Karen had tried everything to remove this woman, to humiliate her, to put her back in her place. But Vanessa never raised her voice, never begged, never fought back in the way Karen expected. She simply let Karen destroy herself. And now everyone knew. A tense silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken judgment. The security officer who had warned Karen was still standing nearby, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. And then, as if the universe decided Karen hadn't suffered enough, a new voice cut through the air like a blade. Well, this is a hell of a way to spend a flight. Karen froze. The voice came from the front of the cabin, deep, authoritative, unmistakably powerful. Every head in first class snapped toward the source, including Vanessa's. And then, stepping into the aisle, a man in a sharp navy blue suit adjusted his tie and gave Karen a look that sent ice down her spine. Robert Carter, the president of Sinclair Airlines, the man who, next to Vanessa, held the most power over this airline. And by the look on his face, he was not happy. Karen's stomach twisted violently. This can't be real. Robert glanced at Vanessa, his gaze warm and familiar. "I was wondering when I'd run into you," he said smoothly. Vanessa smirked. "I was just thinking the same thing." Karen's heart plummeted. They know each other. Robert's expression darkened as he turned his attention to the security officer. "I just got word that there's been an incident." The officer nodded. "Yes, sir. This passenger," he nodded toward Karen, "has been causing multiple disturbances and making false accusations." Robert's sharp gaze locked onto Karen, his jaw tightening. "Is that so?" Karen's lips trembled. I... Robert cut her off instantly. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "I don't know what kind of privilege you're used to, but on this airline, we don't tolerate harassment." Karen flinched. Passengers murmured, some shaking their heads, others outright smirking at Karen's misfortune. Vanessa simply sipped her champagne, thoroughly enjoying the show. Karen, desperate, turned to Robert, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "I didn't mean any harm. I was just trying to make sure everything was safe. I thought—" Robert raised a hand, cutting her off. "No, you didn't think." His voice was deadly calm. "You assumed. You acted on your entitlement. And now you want to backpedal because you finally realized there are consequences for people like you." Karen's face drained of color. "People like you." He had seen right through her. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Robert exhaled slowly, then turned to Vanessa. "What do you want to do?" Karen froze. She turned sharply toward Vanessa, her pulse thundering in her ears. No. She can't be the one to decide." Vanessa set down her champagne glass, her expression thoughtful. She tilted her head slightly, looking at Karen the way one might look at an ant before deciding whether or not to step on it. The entire cabin held its breath. Then she smiled. "Oh, let her stay." Karen blinked. "What?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Vanessa nodded. "She's already lost. Kicking her off would be too easy." Karen's stomach churned. Vanessa leaned in slightly, her voice low, deadly. "I want her to sit in that seat for the next 5 hours, knowing that she has to land at one of my airports, on my airline, knowing she embarrassed herself in front of everyone." Karen's breathing hitched. The passengers laughed. Some clapped. Karen's humiliation was complete. Robert smirked. "Well, that's one way to do it." He turned back to the security officer. "You heard her. Let her stay. But if she so much as looks at Miss Sinclair the wrong way, she's out." The officer nodded. "Understood, sir." Karen slumped in her seat, completely defeated. She had started this flight believing she was untouchable. But now, she was just another fool who underestimated the wrong woman. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted. Karen sat frozen, her entire body tense, her hands gripping the armrests so hard that her nails dug into the leather. Her world had collapsed around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She had lost, completely. The flight attendants had moved on, resuming their duties, but Karen knew the truth. She was no longer one of them. She wasn't a respected passenger anymore. She was the spectacle, the example. And Vanessa, she had won without lifting a finger. Karen swallowed hard as the murmurs continued around her. Some passengers had stopped whispering entirely and were now openly laughing at her misfortune. She felt sick. Vanessa, on the other hand, was calm, collected, powerful. She sat in her seat, her posture relaxed, sipping her champagne as though nothing had happened. But when her eyes casually flicked toward Karen, there was no malice in them, only amusement. And that made it worse. Karen had thrown everything she had at Vanessa. Humiliation, accusations, outright lies. And yet, Vanessa never broke. Instead, she let Karen destroy herself. The remainder of the flight felt like an eternity. Karen tried to shrink into her seat, but she couldn't disappear from the eyes watching her. She could feel the heat of their judgment, the way they no longer saw her as an elite first-class passenger, just a pathetic woman who had let her own arrogance ruin her. The final blow came when the pilot announced their descent. The moment the wheels hit the ground, the entire cabin erupted into applause, but not for a smooth landing. Number 8 was for Vanessa. A flight attendant appeared at Vanessa's side, her voice soft but filled with admiration. "Miss Sinclair, if there's anything we can do to make your arrival smoother, please let us know." Karen nearly choked. They were treating her like royalty. Vanessa gave a polite nod, then turned to Karen, her expression effortlessly amused. "Enjoy the rest of your day," she said smoothly. Karen flinched at the sheer casual dominance in Vanessa's tone. The plane doors opened, and as passengers began filing out, Karen stayed glued to her seat, paralyzed with humiliation. But it wasn't over, because the worst was yet to come. A uniformed security officer stepped onto the plane, scanning the cabin before his eyes landed directly on Karen. Her heart stopped. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice professional but firm. Karen's stomach plummeted. She turned, her face ghostly pale. I... The officer didn't react to her panic. "You need to come with us." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Passengers stared in shock as Karen slowly rose to her feet, her hands trembling. She turned desperately to Vanessa. You can't do this." Vanessa tilted her head, her expression curious. "Do what?" Karen's breath hitched. Vanessa simply smiled. "I haven't done anything. You did this to yourself." Karen's knees nearly buckled. Passengers watched as she was led off the plane, her humiliation now complete. As Vanessa stepped off moments later, a black car was already waiting on the tarmac, doors open, a chauffeur standing at attention. A flight attendant escorted her, still looking eager to please. "Miss Sinclair, we have a private exit for you if you'd like to avoid the crowd." Vanessa smiled graciously. "No need. I think I'll enjoy the view." She walked toward the main terminal, and the sight that greeted her was priceless. Karen, standing in front of a growing group of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in her face. She was trending worldwide. Karen Whitmore, the entitled woman who tried to have the CEO of an airline arrested on her own flight. Vanessa watched as Karen attempted to flee, but there was no escape. Her name was everywhere. Her entire life was over. Vanessa pulled out her phone, scrolling through the headlines. "Karen gets a dose of karma, and it's brutal." "Entitled woman tries to remove black CEO from first class. Instantly regrets it." She chuckled softly. Perfect. As she slipped into her waiting car, she exhaled deeply, her satisfaction finally settling in. She hadn't just won. She had made a statement. Because Karen wasn't the only one like her, and the next time someone thought about judging, assuming, or trying to take away someone's dignity, they would remember this moment. What can we learn from this? Respect is not about wealth, power, or privilege. It's about character. Vanessa never had to raise her voice, never had to lower herself to Karen's level. She let Karen's own arrogance be her downfall. And in the end, justice was served. If you believe no one should be judged based on race or status, hit that like button, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more eye-opening stories. See you in the next one.